This is a recording for the CUPHAT project. My name is Matthew O'Brien. Today is the 24th of July 2023 and I have here with me Pat Mellon. Thank you very much, Pat. Can you just confirm to the recorder that you're happy to take part in this project?
I am quite happy to take part in it, Matthew.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And if you wouldn't mind spelling your name for the recorder, please.
Mellon. Oh, Patrick, or Pat, P-A-T.
Perfect, that's great, Pat. Thanks so much. So, could you tell me a little bit about your early life? Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
My early life was, I was born and reared, as I said, like in Wicklow, in Avoca, the Vale of Avoca, on a small farm in a lane. We would always say a little over a mile long, and now it's a kilometre, or a little over a kilometre and a half. I'm the oldest of four. I suppose in that, being the oldest of four, I naturally or categorically fell into the son who will do the farming, and then typical of that on a small farm, I have three siblings, all younger than me, and all in academia, pushed on for education and all that, like the typical thing of the time.
Okay, very good. And are you still in the Vale of Avoca now?
Still in the Vale of Avoca. We're still the townsland has changed from Ballymoney into Templelusk, but the two townslands adjoin, one side of the hill to the other side of the hill. But still there, and still farm the home farm as well, the original home farm.
Brilliant. Okay, and maybe if you could tell me about some of your earliest memories of your childhood and maybe the place you grew up.
I think Matthew, it's unique to be asked these questions, because all of a sudden you realise, I'm elderly. Is that the reason I've been asked about it? I don't think in a mind I haven't changed any more than when I was young, but I would have grown up in the typical country school, national school in Avoca. I think is one of the I would be fair to say is probably one of the most far-seeing schools at the time. The principal and there was a lot of young teachers came into the school who were there, but very far-seeing, very open, and I would credit to what they'd done for the local people. Remember, it was a small farming area and mining. Avoca Mines was very strong at the time with NET. Both the mines and NET have closed. So we had a reasonable mixture of pupils would have been in the classes at the time. People were coming, people were going, and those things all added. But people would probably look back and say, "Oh God, you were poor," but nobody was poor. Really, we were all in the same boat. It was never an issue about that. But it was a traditional, growing up on a farm, going to school. At the time, Catholicism was a big thing in the area, and you done your time. You went to mass, you served mass, and everything else. I suppose when I think about things now, I would have Avoca at the time had a great hurling and camogie. I played hurling. I would not describe myself as even useful on a field, but one of the things was we had a great Sergeant O'Rourke, and that was his life. And when I think about it now, every young person in the area was involved in it, and there never was an issue. There was, and I would talk about a way of connecting, with people and everything else, and built a great community and built a great spirit and built, I suppose, the first learning of teamwork in that respect. Like.
Okay, very good. And just even on the farm, do you have any kind of memorable experiences from when you were growing up? Do you have any traditions that you used to do on the farm?
Oh, tradition. Well, I suppose growing up on the farm was like, you had your, the cows was milk for the house, the vegetables grow, but you had your jobs to do morning and evening before you went to school. When you came home from school, it would have been we would have started out farming with maybe 10, 15 suckler cows and maybe 20 or 30 sheep. Where, when I ended up farming many years later, it was in the multiples of the hundreds, and how things have changed. But it was, I'm old enough to remember the last of the hay being cocked and the turnips being tinned, the coming of the square baler, which was a great thing, and then the round baler. So I've seen all that progress, and I suppose when I think about previous generations that would have been on that farm where nothing changed the methods didn't change, and within my lifetime the methods have changed immensely.
That's very interesting. And you mentioned the community that existed around hurling. What about the broader community? What was that like when you were growing up? Was it strong?
The broader community was quite strong in the area. As I said, you had a mix, and one of the things I would remember as playing hurling underage. Remember, this was, you know, under 12, under 14, under 16, and under 18. But the amount of people from the area who had nobody playing but still went to the matches, you know, it was like a local derby. Like, I mean, you know, and the excitement. We were, as an underage team, we were well trained and we were quite good for the times, you know. And you know, the treat then that the community would have done with the local hotelier was in the man O'Brien, the man as well deceased, but a great man, in the Valeview Hotel. I mean, once we won a match, I mean, that was the excitement of getting a dinner out. You know, that it was unheard of. Like, I mean, the excitement of going afterwards, and you're getting your meal in the hotel. So the community, there was a very strong community, and you know, it was a community that for then a period of time was devastated because the Vocal Mines closed first, like, I mean, you know, and that was a big blow. And then NET, it closed as well, to not only very large employers in an area, but very good employers, you know, and that would have caused a lot of people moved, like, I mean, and you know, shops closed. I mean, all those things that changed. Like, I mean, there was several shops in the Vocal. There's now one shop. There was two pubs. There's now one pub. You know, and even those are only open at certain times. You know.
And what year did the mines close?
I'm just trying to think. It was in the late 70s, early 80s, probably around that time. I think it was around 79, 80 or 81 or something like that. And that was the second time they had closed originally. You know, and I suppose we grew up on our home farm. There was the old Vocal Mines, which predated this one. And then there was this particular, the last of Vocal Mines, but we would have been farming over it. And, you know, you would have farmers at different times would have lost water because the mine would have been drilling underneath, you know. And one of the other things that you do remember from that, and we've all become very conscious now of the climate and the environment, but when NET was producing nitrogen and fertilizers, on a certain day, if an easterly wind and the damp, this pervading terrible smell, and we would have been, you know, 10 kilometres from that, and that factory is just outside Archaeological at early use. But when we were going to school, every tree around that factory had died from the pollution, and now that's closed, and you can see the trees are coming back. So it's only I suppose in hindsight you see the damage to the environment, a lot of the industrialization done. There's a cost then when you lose it, you lose the jobs and everything else. And I think this is where the past meets the future, like, and how we have to learn from that, like.
And just for the record, what kind of plant was NET?
It was agricultural fertilizer, artificial fertilizer. Do you know?
Yeah.
Do you know?
And obviously the mines would have been an important part of the community. You mentioned from an employment perspective as well. Was there any history around the mines, or any kind of local knowledge of the mines? Or
there would have been great local mines. I mean, the old Avoca, the Crombane penny and the old Avoca penny would have been back in probably the 1800s. How they paid the local miners with the local currency. Like, I mean, you know, and I mean all around Avoca still. I mean, the old Avoca mines is there, but you know, you see the old tramways, you see the old markings. I mean, there's lots of old railways, lots of farmers' gates are hanging out of old railway posts from it. Like, I mean, you know, it gave great employment. You can still see that yellow ochre, you know, in the area around. Like, I mean, you know, now it does had effect on water, as you can imagine, and it still has effect on water things. And the Avoca River, which is a fantastic river, would be from, if you would call it, just south of the meetings to Archaeological. The river is vastly polluted because of that. But I think in recent times there's a small amount of fish starting to, they say salmon are starting to come back up at, like, but it takes a long time for nature to reclaim man's damage to it, like.
And when you were a child in the area, did you I suppose participate in any other activities outside of hurling? Did you often just kind of go off on trails, or?
No, I suppose that you see that you know, we can talk about that now, but like, you remember, like, when we were going to school, I remember on two different occasions in the length of time that I was in primary school, we had a school bus, and then we didn't have a school bus, and it was based on the distance you were from the school. So one inspector would come down and measure it and say, yes, we'd put a school bus on that road, and then 2 years later someone would come down and say no, and it would be taken off it. But you know, everybody walked to school at that stage, and they did, bar for, you know, maybe on a wet day we were run. but you walked to school, you walked home from school. It is Wicklow, so most of the walking was up or down hills. So I mean, people would have talked about hill walking and trail walking, nowadays, whereas back then it was just a part of what you were. There was the old mass paths, some of which are still barely in existence, but you would have stiles across the field, and we could move fairly quickly when you wanted to, that would have been, there was no such thing as foreign holidays. There was no such thing as, the holidays would have consisted of going to cousins and they coming to your place, for the summer, and that was it.
And the mass paths were literally tracks from...
They're literally tracks that would have went from, a line from house to house years ago, where people would head to mass in the morning. So the furthest would start first, but they would pick up with people as they went along the way. And there are still some of the stiles, unfortunately, because of back in the time, what was, increasing desire for agricultural production, ditches were removed and all that. But there are places now, particularly between farmers' boundaries, where the old stiles might still be in place.
Okay, yeah. And have your family ever had an interest in local history or local people or local places? And if they have, could you tell me a little bit?
Local history, but it wouldn't be over. I mean, I suppose the family tree. There's some of them were involved in getting the family tree at the minute. What could I say? My grandparents would have been farming, except for one stage. My mother's parents were blacksmiths. Now that was down near Wicklow town, and their blacksmith. They would have worked on the Brooklyn Bridge past generations, and they came back to Ireland. And we would still on our farm have those old-fashioned, we would call them nearly like the old railway-style gates. They're really, really heavy, 6 foot and 8 foot. No great use for modern farming unless you have two of them together. But the gates are still there. And it's just lovely to look at those gates and think that was, 4 generations of the family made them. And they will outlast any gate still to this day. So you do see that. You see, old buildings that would have been built. We would have on the farm an old cowhouse, a stone-built cowhouse built by the whole family of Joseph Holt of the 1798 rebellion. That family would have been from the Avoca area. So you would have that in the area, and those are all around. The old granite gate posts that would have come from quarries just up over Aughrim,
And would there be any kind of local celebrations or events that maybe have happened in the kind of Vale of Avoca, or maybe are still happening?
I think at the time, most of the local events probably would have been what you call religious-based events more than anything else. And those things have now passed. They would have an event nearly every year now, and there's a miners' cross, but it wouldn't be no more. It's not so much religious, more. The miners in the Avoca mines, they're getting into their late 70s, 80s. And I suppose that's more what they have more than anything else, just, where they would meet and collect on that type of basis.
And are there any interesting stories or folk tales about where you're from, or even the surrounding areas?
I mean, one of the things you would have, there is the old round O, as we would call it, which would have been an old ancient settlement on the very top of the hill. And at this stage now on that, there is a... What is it for measuring the distance between ourselves and Wales? You can at certain times, on certain years, certain clear days, you can see the hills of Wales from where I grew up. And there is that connection across. The biggest things I would remember, the neighbours, some of them in particular, were very superstitious about going into certain fields at night. And there was the old classical one that if you go into that field at night, you'd be caught churning butter till the morning, and they genuinely, these were what you would call hardened men who'd worked all their lives, but they just wouldn't cross that Rubicon, if you want to call it. And I do recall when levelling ditches and modernising the farm, being warned that that ne'er touch that, and certain things. There are certain places we never touch more, and it's more there's an old well and all those things that you don't touch because the stonework is there. They're small. They don't really serve any purpose other than a memory, because I think one of the things you learn, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I have talking about this. I can remember really, really well the first time I would have been 9 or 10 years of age, the first time a shop bought cake came into the house. Now, we would have grown up with, the best of food. We would have probably had apple tart and apple crumble and rhubarb tart and everything else as with the seasons, and we would have had dessert on a regular basis. It was a very physical life, and I can remember the excitement of the first time ever seeing that cake. And I think the reason I remember it was the shock that we had visitors that night and we didn't get to have any. The visitors got the cake. And, it's when you look back on that, and nowadays, it's the home-cooked food is what people want. I remember the portable shop, the shop coming around in the van and bread being delivered. Do you know where it came around? And with all our progress, Tesco now deliver, and so they deliver. We have come full circle, if you want to call it like that. People say, well, okay, today you've got a better choice. But now you do your shopping online, you click the box, somebody else picks the banana, somebody else picks the milk, somebody else. That time, it may not have been a big, but you went and you picked, and there was also that community. An abiding memory is when I did probably 5 or 6, one of the abiding memories, I remember in this very backward farm, a motorcycle coming in with a guard. I remember but I think it was to do with the census. Just coming in with that, and that. And I think one of the big things was at the time also was the postmen. They were mostly on bikes or on thing, but the connection. The postmen, and they were genuine. Not only just. I don't think it was so much in the fact that they were bringing letters, but that was the only communication. But they also came from neighbour to neighbour, and what was happening in one house and how were they getting on and everything else. And that was the internet of today. And it was a very human, and a wet day the postman would come in and have the tea or whatever it was,
Yeah, again, really interesting. You mentioned food.
Yeah.
Did you ever used to go on foraging trips or anything like that?
Of course. I would say the opposite. I would say to you that the easiest way of answering that, I remember the first time I had a burger and chips. And I was well in secondary school at that stage. But of course, as regards, I know people now, everybody talks about mushrooms. We would have picked mushrooms. We would have picked sloes. You would have picked the crab apple. There was crab apple jelly. The apples were picked. Everything, the blackberries, the wild raspberries. Every single one of those things were picked. And it was peculiar. I remember the blackberries. It was nearly always a Sunday. I remember, God rest my poor mother, but it was out, and it picked the blackberries, and there was blackberry jam, and then there was blackberry and apple tart. There was the mixtures of everything. But and I do well recall that the dinner was, they used to talk at home. Everything on the table was grown at home. There was a sheep or whoever it was, the potatoes, the carrots, pinks, the cabbage, the turnips, the whole lot. And it was seasonal, there was a time you'd be absolutely sick of turnip or whatever, cabbage or whatever it was, because that was seasonal. Yeah, but it was that. And the costs, the food costs would have been minimal, if anything at all. The milk was drank, it was unpasteurized. There was no such thing as that. We had hens, so you had eggs, you had the chicken, so that was the roast chicken. So everything was home produced. Everything was really home produced.
And you kind of mentioned bringing it into present day and local life. What's it like to live in the Vale of Wicklow today?
I suppose, is it because as you get with age, you get more reminiscent? But it's a super place. It really is. And despite the changes, the people fundamentally people haven't changed. We talk about internet and we talk about everything else. And I suppose in a way the internet is good for a lot of people because years ago, they went from house to house telling the stories and all those things. And there was that communication. Now there is more communication. It's a different form. But the people, it's the Vale of Wicklow, it is a particularly easy place to live, is what I would describe it as. yes, we would have lived in what we would call, at the time, was remote. But now, I would think Avoca has one of those places that has the best of both worlds. We're an hour from Dublin, we're beside motorways, and yet at the same time, you can disappear very quickly, back into your own world. And it is that. The people of Avoca, I would call them oftentimes very direct, but that's how it. Everybody knows where you stand, and in any community, you may have issues that arise. But the thing is, those issues are always put aside when something happens. It is that. You daren't say anything against the enemy because he's my neighbour, and it is that, because I need my neighbour more than I need my relatives at times, or whatever it was. So and Avoca, it is one of the great things too is, as populations has expanded in the East Coast, and you've more people have come in, and it does help. It's an introduction to the outside world at this stage, but as more people come in, it blends better for society, and people bring different things to a community. Oftentimes, it's very easy for small villages or places to become very insular, but there's nothing like when people come in with new ideas, and they bring a new energy and a new excitement to an area.
And will you notice the population diversity changing in more recent times then?
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, you would notice it. If where our kids are just at Avoca, but the closest local school was Auckland. But when our youngest started school, I think there was 7 or 8 in the class. The year she left, the entrance class was 50. There was 2 extensions gone to the school. The school I went to in Avoca, there's a brand new school, it's expanded. Like I said, the population, there's a huge population now. So you do see those changes. You see the changes, you see that the population is, mass is nearly a thing of the past, and that's not a comment, but it's an observation that, things have moved on. The pubs, and that's, but in the Avoca area there was 3 hotels. There's only 1 hotel now, despite the increase of population. So it's just how people are not, they're not necessarily socialising in the home area. But that, you notice those changes.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the kind of facilities and services that exist in the area, and whether population improved that, or.
Well, population. I think it's very easy people to be negative and the population, but population, people improve everything. It's all very fine to say, and I know Wicklow has been tough on planning, but there's a reason for being tough on planning. But at the same time, you can have the most beautiful hills and mountains and vales, but without people, it's if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? And that's exactly, people. Ireland had a population at one stage of 8 million. We have a population now of 5 million. So there's more than enough space for everybody, and it's good to see people coming in, and it's great for people to come to Avoca and have the life there, that they can have a good life and they can work. It's easy enough for people to work in Dublin, and their kids can grow up in a country area. And I think the Avoca and the surrounding areas, Woodenbridge, Auckland, all those areas, that, yes, we've lost a huge amount of the, if you want to call it, as I said, the pubs, the hotels, the Avoca mines and those things. But nonetheless, people can come there, they can commute if they can commute to work, but their kids, they can put down roots in an area, and they add to an area. I think when people come to an area, everybody wins.
So, thinking back to, you said the sense of community when you were younger was very strong. You would still consider it very strong? I would,
yeah. No, of course I would. I think it's, everybody's inclined to say, I should get into their cars and they go, but they don't, because it's on the road I live on, there's a lot of new houses, and you may not know the people as well as you knew everybody years ago. But I doubt on our road, and there's quite a few houses, and I'd say everybody there's not a car goes the road, but you don't know who that person is, and there is that sense of still looking out. We now have the neighbourhood watch, and that's it's for one reason, but it offers a multitude of other reasons. You know, there's a dog lost. You know, it keeps that connection. You know, somebody's broke down, there's something happening, there's a tree down on the road. And everybody knows that, like, I mean, and you know, we see the cars going, and you see people going to work in the morning, you know, when they're so-and-so from where going to work or whatever else. And there's that in extra, well, they're out of the house today. So if somebody sees something unusual, it's seen, and I think that's a sure sign that a community is working. And I think that's, you know, that I'm not singling at the farming community, but often because in a rural area, the farming people or people living there full time, if they're in the area, there's an innate knowledge of what goes on, and it's a sixth sense that there's just, you know, they know that house is empty during the day or whatever it was, and there's just that innate pick up, and I think it's a great place for people to come, and I think it's a win-win. I think, you know, when people come into an area, everybody wins.
Sure. How much would you consider yourself from the Wicklow Mountains? Maybe what significance does that hold for you?
I didn't, you know, I mean, it's only in recent years that I've really thought about that, and it is one of the things that at this moment, when I grew up, as I said, on one side of the hill we're facing east and we're facing west now, but you know, we have fantastic sunsets, and that's genuine. We can see 3 counties. But when you look at the silhouette of the mountains at night time, and you see that, and you think to yourself that somebody probably stood in this place thousands, if not tens of thousands of years, and guess what? They saw the same thing. Do you know? And I think it gives you a sense of, you know, of how little we are. And I know there's an awful lot of talk of climate change, and there's all those things, you know, but I think that, and I think it's one of the things that we have to remember, that, you know, we think we can change nature. We can't, and it comes and goes. But you see those mountains, and in tens of thousands of years' time, people will still see that same outline. You know, we have, as I said, we're at a highish level, so there's not very many of, you would call the real, where I live, big trees, but we have an oak tree in the field at the back of the house. It's about 250 years old. Now, because of the ground, it might not be the finest oak tree, but you know, for over 200 years, people have stood under that tree, and for 200 years more. You know, and it is that you're very aware. We've leveled the ditches around when we left those trees, because you become very aware that, you know, a chainsaw can do an awful lot of damage in 2 seconds that took hundreds of years. You know, and I think that yes, I understand now how I often wondered, you know, how people grew up in a house, born in a house, lived in a house, and were carried feet first out of the house. And I often thought to myself how unexciting that was. And at the same time, now I think about it, how exciting to be that happy, that, you know, that fulfills you, that was your, you know, from the ground and of the ground and to the ground, like, I mean.
Yeah, sure. How would you characterise living in an upland area?
I would like, I suppose, everybody wants to have a moan, or I was going to say challenging, but no, I have to say, how would I characterise? To me, magnificent, to life enhancing, and that's the word, because, you know, we have views. We see, you know, we can have 4 seasons in a day, but you're also very close to nature. I mean, you know, deer, everything else, all these different animals, the reintroduction of the red kite. Living in Dublin, you know, yes, it has challenges, but you tell me I don't believe anywhere in the world hasn't had challenges. I mean, I think when the first restrictions came into 2 kilometres and 5 kilometres, 2 kilometres and 5 kilometres, I mean, it made no difference to most of the people on our road, you know, in that respect. And that was a huge advantage. And I thought at times of people in apartments, particularly in Italy and Spain and those countries, and the challenges, you know, we can say, oh, sure, we're out in the back end of nowhere, but, you know, every place has its time, and I'd love that. In my opinion, it's the only place I want to be now. You know, and I can see other people born in different circumstances. That's the only place they would want to be. What is it? What's the saying? A savage loves his native soil, isn't it? And you know, So yes, when the weather turns bad and when we have bad snow, yes, we have issues. But the other thing is, we also at this stage are aware, that if the forecast is saying snow, you do certain things and you prepare yourself for it. And it's just another day. You can look at these things as challenges or just look at it as experiences.
And you mentioned snow. How would you ordinarily prepare for that? What can you do?
Well, I suppose there's a whole lot of them from the farming point of view. You prepare the animals, but you have to feed you anyway for the winter. So you prepare for that. You plan for that, and it is very simple things like, to make sure that you're listening to the forecast, but you have your oil tank is full. That if you have coal, you have that. You have, deep freeze, you have food in. So you have if you do all those things, and have that ready, it's nearly disappointment then if the snow doesn't come hard. And I said, that's very flippant, but, you make those, it is one of those things. You'd never be caught in the middle of February with, 50 litres left in the oil tank, and you buy a multiple of the food you require. And then remember, you are in the countryside, so if the milk tank can't get it, well, there's loads of milk for everybody in the area. And it is those things. And one of the things you find that people are trying to help themselves, as in, then people might not want to hear about farmers clearing the road, but they get out on our back road, and the local farmers will clear the road. They'll get out, and if there's a tractor going, if ever was, and it's like that. If you don't have an expectation on someone to do it, and just go and do it, it does. And the other thing is, people will always look out if there's snow. Everybody understands in an area, in an uplands area, that of the issues. And to be very aware, and it's like that, you'll always be aware of the newcomer that might not have understood. And I do recall, was it in 2010 we had the big frost and snow, but explain to a newcomer, leave a little tap just dripping or something, because if not, your pipes put on the thing, your pump will freeze, your well will freeze, you'll have no water. It's all little things like that, and you say to them like that, or whatever they want, and if there's, and it's particularly good for people, elderly people living on their own, because people do watch out for that.
And what for you are the most important aspects of local natural heritage in the Wicklow Mountains? You mentioned landscapes. You mentioned wildlife as well. Okay,
I would have, remember when I stayed at home to farm first, we were coming up where my parents would have been talking about, I think it was Justin Keaton, one more cow, one more sow, one more acre on the plough. I went I won a scholarship to Agriculture College, where it was to produce more. Production. We would have got grants to level ditches. And to that, and we've done that, and we increased numbers up to, we had hundreds of sheep. And the thing was, the challenge now is coming back, that now it's the opposite. But you do wonder, and we see what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, not to diverge, but with the whole food security issue. And I would have, I suppose, we have hares back on our farm. I grew up and you always saw hares, but for a period of time when we leveled the ditches and we ploughed the fields and we made them bigger, the hare was gone, and it was gone. And it's only when you stopped and realised that your kids haven't seen a hare, and you start to think, okay, is that my legacy? Is that, and we have some, maybe a wet corner now, and where there's a time we had drained it, and now you sort of say, right, okay, and we have done that, we're going to leave it, and then you see the hare comes back, and you can see the owls, and you say, so I don't want to be the one that changed the landscape forever, and to see the hares, to see all the wildlife, they are a part. They have as much a part in this world as we have, and it's preserved that, and I think there's a perception, and I think that's unfair, that farmers, and I'm not because I come from a farming background, the farmers set out to destroy the land. They don't, because there's not a farmer that doesn't want to hand on in better condition what he got himself or he or she got. Remember that what we have seen in agriculture and the changes in agriculture, remember, has been led by the department, has been led by nobody else. Do you know? And okay, we now have we accept that we have to change, and there's no question about that. But I think the story that has to be also told that this is going to cost. I mean, if we would have been producing maybe 800 or 900 lambs, you know, now if a farmer that was producing that number of lambs to make a living, if somebody expects him to produce that to make that same living on 300 lambs, somebody else is going to have to pay an awful lot more. And I think those are just, you know, explanations that need to be given. The other thing I have an issue is we have very sustainable produce here in Ireland. If we produce a litre, if we decide that we need a litre less dairy cows, well, for every litre of milk, which is the most sustainable litre of milk in the world, for every litre of milk we don't produce, somewhere else will the rainforest in Brazil be cut to do that? And so you have all those things, I mean, but thankfully we've had a lot of schemes. There's new schemes, acres and all those things that are hopefully going to help to change. And it's about changing the mindset as well. You know, remember that all the different farming organisations, as in the Department of Agriculture, Teagasc, everything else, you know, ragweeds, weeds, they were classified as weeds. Nettles were weeds. Now nettles are not weeds, you know, and it is just to change that mindset that when you walk through nettles and you see the butterflies and everything else, and it's just that these are not ugly. It's the perception of what is good looking at whatever it is, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges. But you know, and I think that's where our future lies.
Sure. And even thinking back to when you were a child, and you mentioned that hares had come back. You were seeing hares
yes.
when you were a child. Now they're back.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that maybe you saw wildlife habitat-wise when you were a child that maybe doesn't exist in the same way now?
Well, I suppose one of the things I remember when we were, you know, the tinning the turnips, when you're down on your hands and knees on those long drills, you know, and they seem forever long. I mean, okay, maybe when I get older, I feel it. I think to myself, it's not. But I do remember we used to call them the asp, but the little lizard. In the real hot weather, you would see these guys, you know, and of course they lived in the ditches, in the stones, and particularly that. And the hot weather, they come out and you see them sun themselves. And 2 years ago, we saw them again. And there was a period of, I'm saying this, and obviously they've still been there, but as agriculture become mechanised now, but you would have seen that those little asp, they're little tiny little lizards. I don't know what the correct name. We always call them an asp, but tiny little lizards, and lovely little as you see them but they were gone as quick as the minute you seen them. I mean, frog spawn. Frog spawn was a thing we would have all grown up with. Like, I mean, all grown up with, you know, and it's nice to see that coming back now, and I think there's a different viewpoint now when you see frog spawn now. Like, I mean, you know, it's near enough. I'll watch out for that to protect that, and oftentimes if you'll see it, you know, you'll put netting wire over it, you know, to stop the birds, to give the tadpoles a chance. Like, I mean, and these all those different things. Like, I mean, you know, hens and chickens. No, it's very rare to see a farmyard now with small chickens. Like, I mean, it's you know. I mean, how many people we've grown up where you would have watched, you'd been shown when the time when the hen was, the chick was due to come out of the egg, where you see the chicken breaking out of an egg, and it's, you know, it's wet, it's out, and in a few minutes it's fluffy. These are all things that you miss.
So, do you think that the state of kind of wildlife and habitats in nature in the Wicklow Mountains is improving?
No, I'd like to think. I mean, I have worked recently on a project on deer and everything else. I don't think it's improving. I think it will improve, and I think that's. I mean, I spent 3 years on a project on managing deer, and one of the things, you know, even that I learned from, but you have to explain that the deer is one species that has no natural predator, and where there's no natural predator, it in itself has an effect. And the easiest way of saying that was explained, like, you look at the damage that man can do if man is not controlled, and that every, you know, and you see this, there's a lot of very good plans now coming in to manage deer, but to manage every other species as well. Like, I mean, the beetles that are required, the bees, the honeybee. Like, I mean, let's face it, we've for my 50th birthday, I was given a beehive. You know, because we would have grown up with bees, remember that? And we had a neighbour, the man is long since gone, Kevin O'Toole, and Kevin had bees, and Kevin was one of those, He could take the honey off the hives. There was no such thing as suits or anything else like that. And the section of honey, that was and it's good to see people are starting to recognise those things. And there is that challenge, with agricultural production, sprays and all those things. But I think that it's fully accepted now. And when things are explained that the bee is very necessary for good crops, and thankfully, pesticides, and what you have in an area now is, if a farmer is going to use an insecticide or pesticide, he will let all the people who have beehives know. So you shut them up in the morning, and it's just simple things like that. So while I think that it has been very challenged, I think that there's a huge improvement coming. The red kite was reintroduced 10, 12 years ago, but there's a fantastic population of red kites in Avoca. Now, the other thing you notice is where the red kite is in and strong, the smaller birds are not as strong. And it is one of those things that I suppose we're always going to have to chop and change, because once you interfere with any one little thing, it does have, it's not if you're interference, it does have a cause and effect, and I think that's what we watch. But I do believe, looking at the way, particularly where the farming people are viewing things, and up to the end of 2022, remember, as a farmer, we were penalised if we had gorse, if we had, you were actually penalised, and how many people know now it's actually incentivised. And I think so. Once the changeover and the change of mindset to different methodologies, it will make for huge improvements.
Okay, yeah. You mentioned earlier about the buildings in the farmhouse, the old buildings in the farmhouse, the stone buildings. I'm just curious, are there any ancient sites in the upland areas right here? Do you know anything about them?
Well, see, Fainan's up over is one of those ancient prehistoric sites. It's up over Manor Kilbride, up that way up in the hills. You have the Motley Stone in Avoca. It's another thing. It's not so much that it's a hugely heritage site, but it's a particular boulder that was carried there during the Ice Age. It's not natural to the area. You have around here, you have as I said, the ring forts. There's quite a few ring forts in Avoca, but in Baldinglass, there's a very fine one in Tullow, just on the Wicklow Carlow border as well. So, and I think there's also a recognition, that even gateways can be, a heritage factors. One of the things is there's in Wicklow there's the Pure Mile. It's an incentive, a bit like the Tidy Towns for rural areas, but that has shown stone shores, box shores, where they're floored with stones, in the countryside. And in last year was one particular year, the particularly dry year. What you noticed was, and we'd have noticed in our farm and a lot of other farms, where you had an extended dry period, you would have noticed straight lines of burnt grass. And we dig down 4 or 5 foot underneath our old box shores that were put in, for carrying water. And would you believe it? They work as perfect then as today as they did now, and we took photographs and we marked them. And it's one of those things, because you marked them, because at one stage you were saying water was was a lot of places around the area, the water's gravity fed, from springs, and you say it's getting very low. But then you did notice that where all these lines and fields that are well forgotten, but they are old box shores. And when you dig down, you see this wall, this tree walls, a floor and 3 walls of stone, and the water is flowing for past generations. And you saw where old homesteads, you would look on a map and you would have seen at some stage on that map, whether it was on the valuation maps of 1865 or whatever it was, you've seen the outlines of a farm building. They're well gone, it's a grass field now. But in the dry year, you would have seen the marks. You see where down maybe 2 foot, there's some remnants of old foundations where it had dried out that bit quicker. And it's just a reminder that, we all talk about leave no trace. And, it's hopefully we will leave as little trace as they did,
Sure. And are you aware of any of the kind of younger or more recent archaeological sites? So you mentioned the drains, the ditches there. Are there any others?
See, I think in an area in Avoca like in that, like I mean, they are doing an archaeological dig here at this moment in time, just down the road here in Glendalough, and I think they're doing the same in Arklow as well. And I think one of the good things about that, they're inviting young people and anyone to come along. I mean, to come along and see what's there, because what's underneath your feet you never know, and it's just to watch those things.
And would you have a favourite archaeological site or building or feature?
I think to me the famous the one archaeological site is as we would call the Round O. I mean, it's just a very simple. It's a perfectly circular. Would have been an old, I suppose, secure farm dwelling. But then in more recent times, a lookout in 1798, it was more a military lookout. But it is just that mound, and when you stand on it, it's sited because there's 360 degrees of view. And for you to stand on that, and to think of that's where people lived, and or had their watch out for the whole area. We stand on it today, and even if I bring it today, you don't want your coat on you. But in difficult times, people done that, and it's just to see the area. And I think it is that you look at the area, and okay, you can see new houses in the distance, you can see farmhouses, we can see wind turbines in the distance, but you take everything else, take those man-made structures, nothing else has changed. The river still flows in the valley, and it will still flow in the valley. It's not going to move, and that's where it has for thousands and thousands of millennia, and that's the very same it will continue. And I think in that respect, it's humbling in a way. It's also relieving in a way that no matter what we do, we're really not as important as we think we are.
And how would you view the current state of tourism to the Wicklow Mountains?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose working on trails for years, and then I was a member of Wicklow Tourism and chair of Wicklow Tourism. I wonder when you say the state, because is that a leading question and I respected the way it's put because it's a good way of talking about it, but having and still dealing with rural areas and rural people where this is going. One of the things I would think to say, I often hear people say, you should look at us, we've got nothing, nobody has done anything for us. I think the first thing is, number one is, at times there has been an expectation that somebody needs to do it, but you need to communicate. The other thing is, I have a belief that maybe when we talk about a problem, but maybe the problem is actually an advantage. And I'm dealing recently with particular areas, and they were saying nobody has done anything for us. We're in the back end of nowhere, and they use all those words. And you try to explain to them that actually maybe you're really, really lucky on that, because what do people want now? Everybody talks about experiential tourism. Everybody talks about all those things. But what's more experiential than if you go to an area that hasn't changed? If you go to an area and talk about the things that you and I have been talking about, archaeological, heritage, flora, fauna, where nothing has changed. That's what and that's what people want nowadays. And I think that the tourism future for that is massive. If it's but remember to keep what you have, and words like sustainability, they're great words, but they need to be actions as well. And remember, sometimes to do less is to do more. And the other thing is, and it's like that from CUPHAT. A rural area in Wales and a rural area in Wicklow or Wexford or wherever it is, they're all suffering the same. There's, is it a challenge? Is it really a challenge? Or is it an advantage to live in those areas? And I think, one of the things I discovered with working with tourism over the years, sometimes our biggest issues can be that we want to project our view of what our holiday should be onto someone else. And I remember discussing that many a time that, look at the weather today in Ireland, the typical wet summer. Wouldn't you love to get away from the sun? And who'd come here because all it does is rain? But you look at what's happening on the continent today. And the other thing is, Do you know, and not just today, but you know, people growing up across Europe, where the population are very heavy in cities, in apartment blocks. What's better than coming to Ireland and getting wet? There's nothing. I mean, the stories people will tell, and I working on trails, I remember someone saying, "What if they meet an angry farmer?" Is that not another story? I mean, you know, so somebody gives. I mean, one particular thing, a time meeting B&Bs, and they were saying, on a wet day, there's nothing to do here. And I said to them, I think you should change that. And I said, what would we do on a wet day? I said, send them to the local mart. And they said, what? Now, the thing was, yeah, I know that the viewpoint was, oh, will they come back with this? But they did. And I remember one particular family that had come from Spain, and they were saying, and they had went to the mart, and of course, the noises, the smells, the thing, it was a real experience. And I can tell you a true story. A group of French girls came to South Wicklow, to an area in Tinnahealy, to walk the Wicklow Way, and they had plans, and they left their B&B to move on. On the way, they met a part of the Wicklow Way. There was a farmer, he was gathering sheep with his dog, and they wanted to take a photograph, but bachelor farmer, he said, yeah, but he had him standing in a gap. But them girls spent the day dipping sheep with that man. And then he brought him, and they had a few drinks in the local pub. But then the realisation dawned on them, they hadn't moved on. So they had to go back to the bed and breakfast. But they went back to the bed and breakfast, and they stayed there. But from that area now, that area in South Wicklow, now gets tourists every year from that place in France where they come from, because they went back with the stories. They got mucked from head to toe. They got covered in sheep. All the things that shouldn't happen, do you know? But it was genuine experiential tourism. And I think it doesn't have to involve cities. It doesn't have to involve, you know, and we're very quick to say we don't have something, you know, we hear public transport, all those issues. Wicklow has 5 train stations. You know, so I mean, you know, all down along the side. It's Wicklow and a lot of counties, they're an awful lot more approachable and easy to get to than what we think. There's a good motorway structure in Ireland, you know, and a small bit of thinking gets over an awful lot of, you know, I mean, and if you bring people, you know, to a countryside and they walk the countryside, and I think if you talk in an area, you know, I remember meeting a group of landowners, and they were saying, what do they get from tourists in an area? And you explain that the local hotel, where not far from where I am, they employ between 70 and 80 people at peak times, but they all employ local people. You know, the kids go to school there. You know, and then you explain to the farmers, like, when you see, and all the people, when you see Wicklow lamb, whose lamb do you think that is? When you see, you know, and we all now want to buy local food or local vegetables. So the more tourists that come, it has, you just because you're not taking the cash or taking the payment from the tourist does not mean you're not getting a huge benefit from it. And if your kids are getting employment, or you're getting employment, if your food's being used, and those type of things, I think, make people think no matter how rural an area, you have a place in tourism. You know, and you are playing a part in tourism. And the Irish are, when that's explained to them, they're very good at that.
Sure. And you touched on some of them there, I think, but what would some of the biggest challenges that tourism brings to an upland area such as this?
The biggest challenges that they bring, I would say that the tourists themselves don't bring the challenge. I think the challenge is probably with ourselves in not being aware of how much goes on in an area. You know, it's very easy to be insular in our thing, but if you come to an area, I think the challenge is for the local people to understand that if somebody comes to an area like Evoke or Rockham, I spoke to you about, you know, playing underage hurling. Do you know, if you want, there are activities there. If tourists come, send them to a local match. I mean, what could be more exciting than a club match in Wicklow? I mean, you know, and I think the challenges is marketing tourism. We have Tourism Ireland will market abroad, Fáilte Ireland will market here. The marketing that needs to be done is probably to the Irish people, you know, to ourselves, and it is that to be positive on what we actually have. And I think that's the single biggest challenge, and the opportunities that exist for people. You don't have to, you don't have to now, but with Airbnb, with different rooms, and if you have kids coming on or if they don't want to work abroad, there are opportunities for them here. And it's about explaining the opportunities, and it's about being open to different things and working together. And that's where I think the single biggest challenge is. I think we have everything. We have absolutely everything you ever needed in Ireland, in Wicklow, for tourists. We have it all. We have the scenery, we have the weather that's good, don't worry about the rain, and Irish music, there's local cultural groups everywhere, there's GA matches to beat the band, there's trails, there's everything else, and it's just explaining to people that that's what is there and how to access them.
And you mentioned some of them there again. What sites, trails or locations do you think that tourists visit most in Wicklow?
I think that, we're very close to here. Glendalough has to be the number one, and I do recall many years ago, believe it or not, many years ago, a survey being done. I think 2/3 of Irish people who came to Glendalough weren't able to name somewhere in Wicklow that they could go, and I think it's one of those things, and that's about getting that out, and we're getting better at that. But you have the likes of Wicklow. We have now got beyond the trees in Avondale. You have a lot of walking in Tinnahealy and South Wicklow, and bit by bit, that's starting to come together. I mean, it's like that on a bank holiday weekend. The traffic jams in Glendalough can be terrible, and the whole of the rest of the county, not just Wicklow, but Wexford, Carlow, all those things, they're all turn for people to come there. And it is that like.
Yeah, and what role do you think upland communities can play in developing tourism in an area?
Yes, I think they can, by exactly as we say, and I think you have a lot of great community groups, and it's not to sell, but to explain what's in an area to the people of the area, which it seems unusual, but like that, perfection is not necessarily a requirement for anything. That what you have in an area, the trails that are in an area, and sorry, go ahead in the question again. Just remind me of that.
No, it was just about what role upland communities play in developing tourism.
Yeah, and I think that's it as a centre of information, as a connection. And the other thing is, like, for example, that to explain to B&Bs, don't compete against each other. Compete with each other. Remember, as an area, if you have 4 or 5 B&Bs or on a local restaurant or a hotel or things or activity, if you can come together, you're offering the very same package that Disneyland, a different type of Disneyland. Like, you don't have to, and it's just explaining that, and upland communities can be that point of contact. And it's about the point of contact that there's a guy down the road that has a school bus. He does school bus runs. But guess what? During the summer holiday season, he's not doing the school bus run, but he'll be there available to pick up from the airport. And that is a point of contact to explain, to be that centre where people can touch in and touch out of.
Sure. If you were to bring a group of tourists to one particular site in the Wicklow Mountains, what would that be?
One particular site? Oh my God. I don't fall out with everybody in Wicklow or Glendalough is number one, but because it's the number one, I'm trying to think of somewhere else that Avondale, the meetings at Water, I know that's where I am as well from. The other thing then I would also consider, the Tinnahealy, Shillelagh, the Claddagh, that connection with Canada, and that, and it is to go back, that nothing has changed, and I think it is that when you walk among the people there, and there's a warmth, there's a real warmth. But the meetings at Water too, where the rivers meet, Avondale, the trees, I mean, and then you go down to Callatin, Tomlefin Oak Woods. When you think about Tomlefin Oak Woods and the Great Oak, and Tomlefin Oak Woods, when I think about it all of a sudden, like, I mean, we give out about politicians back in the day, but I think at the time it was Charles Haughey to stop the last of the Great Oaks being culled down. There was a great local group who fought very hard to stop that, and lucky enough they did. You know, and so it's one of the last naturally regenerated great oak woods in Europe, like, I mean, and I think there's something special about that as well, like.
Yeah, for sure. So what would you consider the best thing about living in an upland area?
Solitude, peacefulness, fresh air, and you know, I mean, it's like that. There's nothing like a blast of rain from the west to wake you up. Nobody has died from getting from a wet day. You know, I think it's that. I think it's a great leveler that when you stand out there and when you think about, you know, how insignificant we really are, that we need to enjoy being where we are when we are here, that, you know, and it's to live in the, I think one of the things is to live in the moment, and I think that's one of the big things, that you're in nature. You know, when apart from houses, a few houses that have been built, when I look around, it's nature's what I'm looking at, nothing else. It's nature, you know, and I'm privileged to be living in nature. And I'm living there at the bequest or not at the good permission of nature. And I think when you realise that, like, I mean, and when you see wildlife and see everything else, and just, you know, that's to me.
And we've kind of talked about challenges in different ways, but in a broad sense, what challenges do you think the communities in the Wicklow Mountains will face in the short and in the long-term future?
I think, okay, because of the positive things that I would have said about living there, one of the things the Wicklow, the Uplands is going to achieve, we have a huge housing crisis here in Ireland, a huge crisis. So more people need somewhere to live. At this moment in time, the huge focus is, you know, where a lot of the work at this moment, and I mean, even with working from home, it is Dublin centric. So for people, I mean, the logic and if we talk about sustainable transport, the closer you live to work, so the pressure comes on that. We have a huge amount of people then that want to recreate. I mean, half the population of Ireland is centred in the greater Dublin area and the surrounding counties. Where do they want to recreate? Well, they want to recreate. So that's a huge challenge. And when you take the requirement to live from local people and everything else, and I do believe local people and people should be, I mean, there's no point in having a beautiful hill if nobody lives there. I mean, it's all very fine, but, you know, that but also then with the pressure, for, as we know, for climate change, for the pressure to improve biodiversity, you know, so you have a whole mix of huge numbers of people wanting to recreate there, and it's a pressure point that needs to be carefully managed.
And then just in closing, what does it mean to you to be from, living and working in this area?
Everything. I mean, to get to my age and to honestly say, I think I have the best possible life. You know, at different times in life you think, oh, I'd like to have done this, I'd like to have done that. But when I look now, I wouldn't swap my life for anything. I can genuinely, and I can hand on my heart say that, like, I mean, that I've had the luckiest life, you know, and I think it is to understand that luck plays an awful lot, you know. I mean, I think particularly about the crisis that the Ukrainian people and Syrian people and everywhere else across the world are going through, and I've never had that, you know, and so I mean, yeah, you know, and that's why we need to share that. I mean, and that's one of the things that, you know, because I think oftentimes we forget, because of just by fate's fortune where we were born, the lives that we can live, and that some other people born at the very same time, just in a different location, you know, and that's why I think we need to be a little bit more sharing, a little bit more, you know, open and understanding that it's one world, and that's all I could say. I think I've had the most amazing life, and I wish more people could have had it, or can have it.
Sure. And is there anything that we haven't discussed that you'd like to add to the record?
Geez, no, what a Joe. I think I don't know. Is it because you start to wax lyrical? But as I said to you earlier, the travelling shop now is coming back in the deliveries, the change in the farming practice, and I think it is more that the more I see of it, we're not we change and we come back to the same point that we left. I think that there's a lot of challenges. People see a lot of challenges at the minute. I think you have a lot of people, and rightfully so, are worried about climate change. And I would be worried about climate change. I think that maybe certain parts of the, maybe, and that's because I come from a farm background, think that they're being to blame. I don't think that serves. I think that, if things are explained to all sides, that there are solutions, and there are solutions that are necessary and will happen. I think coming from a rural area and from an upland area, the people are incredibly flexible, when it comes to that, and they understand what is necessary. Nobody in Uplands area or any area that I know of wants to get to the stage where you can't bend down in a stream. I mean, to go to a stream of cold water and to be able to drink and know that this is as good as it gets. I mean, nobody wants to lose that, and I think that's one of the things that I think that's one of the things we need to face for the future is partnership and collaboration. They're words that are thrown out all the time, but when you look at some of those tribes in the Amazon where the elders go off into into the hut or into the bush to sort out things and come to it, and I think that's what we need. I think that there are local solutions to local problems, and there are national solutions to national problems, and follow with local, and if national follows local, I think there'll be no problems.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for that.
That's all, Matthew. It was a pleasure to talk to you.